The first light of dawn didn't so much rise as it bled across the Montana sky. It was a cold, lonely light, painting the vast emptiness in shades of amber and bruised purple. Eliza Northcott stood on her porch, feeling the chill of the wood through the soles of her worn boots. The dew on the tall grass glittered like a field of tiny knives. She was about to go back inside, back to the endless list of chores that kept her father's homestead from crumbling into dust, when she saw it. On the weathered sill of her window, a small, tight bouquet of wildflowers. This wasn't the first time. It was the third. 3 mornings in a row, this splash of impossible color had appeared out of nowhere. Purple and yellow, and a blue so deep it was almost black. Her heart didn't skip a beat. It hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a gift. In a land this hard, nothing was ever just a gift. She walked over, her movements stiff, and touched a petal. It was still wet, impossibly fresh. Someone had been here, just moments ago, standing right outside her window while she slept. She brought them inside, her hands trembling just slightly. She put them in a small glass jar with the others, the growing collection on her small wooden table. They looked pretty. They also looked like a warning. It was 1872. Life out here for a woman alone was less a life and more a daily negotiation with death. At 25, Eliza had been running this ranch by herself for 8 months, ever since her father had coughed his last breath into a ragged cloth. The folks in Silver Creek, the nearest town, had given her 6 weeks. 6 weeks before she'd break, sell the land for pennies on the dollar, and run back east with her tail between her legs. But they underestimated her. They didn't know she'd inherited her father's stubbornness right along with his debts. She looked out the window, past the wilting flowers, toward the rolling hills that dissolved into the jagged teeth of the mountains. The nearest neighbor was the Diamond Creek Ranch, a sprawling empire owned by the Lambert family. She barely knew them. Just polite nods in town, the kind of acknowledgement you give a stranger you expect to see buried by the next winter. Her coffee was bitter on her tongue as she thought about the day ahead. The south pasture fence was down again. The new horses her father bought, his last foolish hope, were still wild. Every day was a fight, and now she had a secret admirer, or a secret enemy. A sharp, sudden knock on the door made her jump, sloshing coffee onto the table. Visitors were rare. 10 miles from town, a knock on the door could mean anything. She grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall before she even thought about it. The cold weight of the steel a familiar comfort. She peered through the small window, her breath held tight in her chest. It was Sheriff Thomas Miller. She let out the breath, but her hand didn't leave the rifle. "Morning, Miss Northcott," he said, tipping his hat as she opened the door. His smile was easy, but his eyes were not. They darted around, assessing everything. "Just making my rounds, checking on the folks out this way." "Sheriff," she said, her voice steady, "care for some coffee?" "Much obliged," he said, stepping inside. He was a big man, and he made her small cabin feel even smaller. His gaze fell instantly on the jar of wildflowers. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, something she couldn't read. "Someone's been bringing you gifts, I see." Eliza felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The way he said it, gifts, sounded like an accusation. "Yes, for a few days now. I don't know who." The sheriff nodded slowly, stroking his chin. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the flowers, a strange intensity in his eyes. "You need to be careful, Eliza. Real careful." He finally looked at her. "Strange times. We got those cattle rustlers moving through the territory. They hit the Lambert place 2 nights ago." This was news. The Diamond Creek Ranch was a fortress, with a dozen ranch hands. "I hadn't heard." "Happened late," the sheriff said, finally accepting the cup she offered. "Xavier Lambert and his men tracked him for a spell, but lost the trail in the foothills. 20 head gone. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. Just wanted to warn you. Keep that rifle handy. He nodded toward the gun still in her hand. Xavier mentioned he'd be patrolling the boundaries, the line between your property and his, so don't be alarmed if you see riders. After he left, a profound sense of unease settled over Eliza. It wasn't just the rustlers, it was the sheriff. The way he'd looked at the flowers, the way he'd emphasized that Xavier Lambert would be riding her fence line. It felt less like a warning and more like a message, a threat wrapped in a friendly visit. The Montana sun was a hammer, beating down on her as she worked on the fence. Every snap of wire, every thud of the post driver echoed in the vast, crushing silence. She kept her revolver on her hip and her rifle leaning against the nearest post. She scanned the horizon constantly, not for rustlers, for him, for Xavier Lambert. She'd only seen him a few times. He'd come back from some fancy school in Boston last year to help his aging father. In town, they said he was smart, tough, and fair. But out here, words from town meant nothing. Out here, you were what you did, not what people said about you. And then, she saw him. A lone rider, approaching from the north, from the direction of the Diamond Creek. He moved with an easy confidence, his horse a powerful chestnut that ate up the ground. Even from a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and the black Stetson. Her hand instinctively went to the butt of her revolver. She didn't draw, not yet. But she was ready. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance away, not wanting to spook her. He had manners, or he was smart. "Miss Northcott," he called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. He tipped his hat. Sheriff Miller mentioned he'd stopped by. Eliza just nodded. She shielded her eyes, watching him. His eyes were a startling, piercing blue. They weren't just looking at her. They were taking her in, measuring her, assessing the fence, the rifle, the set of her jaw. "He told me about the rustlers," she replied, her voice flat. "Sorry for your loss." Xavier Lambert dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, taller than she'd realized. He moved like a man who was born in the saddle, but had learned to walk in rooms where deals were made. 20 head. It could have been worse. He walked over to the fence, his gaze taking in her work. His eyes lingered on a post she'd just set. It was a little crooked. "This is a two-person job, at least." Eliza's back stiffened. There it was, the condescension she expected from every man out here. "I manage." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "I have no doubt, Miss Northcott." He moved closer, running a hand over the rough wood of the post. "Your father taught you well." The mention of her father was like a key turning a lock she didn't know was rusted shut. Her defensiveness eased, just a fraction. "He said a woman on a ranch needed to know how to do everything a man could do, and do it better, because she'd never get the credit." "Smart man," Xavier said. He reached for the hammer she'd set down. "Would you object to some assistance? I've got an hour or two." Pride warred with the ache in her back. The sun was relentless, the work was slow, and he was right. It was a two-person job. "I'd be grateful," she finally said, the words tasting like defeat. They worked. For a long time, the only sound was the rhythmic pounding of their hammers, a steady beat in the vast emptiness. He worked with a quiet, brutal efficiency. His hands were strong, calloused, but his movements were precise. He didn't waste a single motion. He made tasks that had taken her an hour look easy. She hated him for it, and she was grateful for it. "I've been meaning to call on you properly," he said, driving a nail home with one perfect strike. "To see if there's anything you need, being neighbors." Eliza paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. "That's kind of you. But I'm managing." "I can see that," he said. And the way he said it, she believed he meant it. There was respect in his eyes, but there was something else too, something hungry. Still, he continued, his gaze sweeping over her land, the small cabin, the modest herd grazing in the distance. With these rustlers about, I'd feel better knowing you weren't completely alone out here. His tone was smooth, concerned, but the words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I'd feel better. Not you. Me. It was a statement of possession, a subtle claim laid over her and her land. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Lambert, she said, her voice colder than she intended. Xavier, he corrected, that small smile returning. Mr. Lambert is my father. They finished the fence. The new section was straight and strong, a testament to his skill. He talked about the rustlers, their methods, the signs to look for. He was knowledgeable, helpful, too helpful. She invited him in for a coffee, feeling it was the least she could do. It was a mistake. The moment he stepped inside her home, the small space seemed to shrink around him. His presence was overwhelming, and his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, went straight to the jar on the table. The Wildflowers. Those are lovely, he said, his voice casual. Too casual. Eliza's blood ran cold. Yes, she managed to say. Someone's been leaving them on my windowsill. A little mystery. A strange, unreadable expression flickered across Xavier's face. It was there for a second, a flash of something hard and calculating, and then it was gone, replaced by a polite smile. He just nodded, said nothing more, and changed the subject. But Eliza saw it. She saw that flash, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her mystery was solved, and her real trouble was just beginning. That night, Eliza didn't sleep. She sat in the dark by her window, her rifle across her lap, watching the moonlit landscape. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a footstep. She knew he would come. He was arrogant. He thought she was a simple, grieving girl, overwhelmed and in need of a strong man to save her. He thought she hadn't seen the truth in his eyes. He was wrong. Just before dawn, when the sky was a bruised pre-dawn gray, she saw him, a silhouette on horseback, moving slowly, cautiously, from the direction of Diamond Creek. He dismounted a ways off, tying his horse to a tree, and approached her cabin on foot. He moved with the silence of a predator. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild thing. He was carrying something, a small, fresh bunch of wildflowers. Eliza watched, her breath caught in her throat, as he walked right up to her window. He knelt, placing the flowers gently on the sill, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. For a moment he lingered, his head bowed, as if in prayer, or as if he were marking a grave. She waited. She waited until he had walked back to his horse, until he had swung himself into the saddle. Then she opened the door. "Good morning, Mr. Lambert," she called out, her voice ringing sharp and clear in the morning stillness. Xavier froze. She saw his whole body go rigid. Slowly, like a man moving through deep water, he turned his horse to face her. The first rays of sun caught his face, and she saw it clearly. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't flustered. He was furious. He had been caught, and he didn't like it. He recovered quickly, tipping his hat, his face becoming a smooth, unreadable mask. "Miss Northcott," he said, "just checking the fence line." "With flowers?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. The smile he gave her was all teeth. He dismounted again, walking towards her, his spurs jingling a cold, menacing rhythm. "I hope I haven't offended you," he said, his voice a low purr. "I noticed them growing along the creek that divides our properties. They reminded me of you." "Of me?" Eliza kept her hand away from the gun on her hip, but she was acutely aware of it. "Strong," he said, his eyes boring into hers, "but beautiful. Surviving against the odds." The words were perfect, poetic even. But they felt rehearsed, a line from a play he'd memorized. The warmth she should have felt was absent, replaced by a deep instinctual chill. He was playing a part. But why? "I've been wondering who my mysterious admirer was," she said, playing along. "Not an admirer," he corrected smoothly. "Just a concerned neighbor. I've been riding the boundaries every morning since the rustling. Your place is on my route." The excuse was plausible, too plausible. It covered everything. "Well, concerned neighbor," Eliza said, forcing a smile. "Would you care for some breakfast? It's the least I can offer, for the flowers, and the fence." Over plates of bacon and eggs, he told her about his life. The university in the East, his father's failing health, his duty to the ranch. It was a compelling story. He was a man of education and honor, forced back to a rugged life he was more than capable of mastering. He made her feel safe. He made her feel seen. He was a master at his craft. "It must be difficult," he said, his voice soft with sympathy, "running this place alone." Eliza looked down at her hands, calloused and rough. "Some days are harder than others, but it was my father's dream. Now it's mine." "What is your dream exactly?" he asked. The question was direct, intimate. It caught her off guard. She looked up and met his gaze. His blue eyes were intense, searching. For a moment, she almost believed the concern was real. "To make this ranch thrive," she said. "To prove my father was right to believe in me." His expression softened. A flicker of something genuine seemed to pass through his eyes. "From what I've seen, you're well on your way." The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Xavier was on his feet in an instant, his easy charm gone, replaced by a coiled, dangerous tension. He moved to the window, his hand already on his revolver. "Stay inside," he commanded. "It's not my men." Eliza ignored him. She grabbed her rifle. "This is my home, Mr. Lambert." They stepped onto the porch together, a united front. But Eliza knew it was an illusion. 4 riders were coming, moving at a steady, confident pace. They were rough-looking men, the kind that lived on the fringes of the law. Eliza recognized the one in the lead. Jake Harlow, a drifter with a mean streak and a reputation for trouble in Silver Creek. "Well, well," Harlow called out, a greasy smile spreading across his face. He had a gold tooth that glinted in the sun. "If it ain't the high and mighty Xavier Lambert having a cozy breakfast with the Northcott girl." Xavier stepped slightly in front of Eliza, a protective gesture. But it felt wrong. It felt staged. "State your business, Harlow." Harlow's grin widened. "Just being neighborly. Heard the lady was all alone out here. Thought she might appreciate some company." Eliza leveled her rifle, the stock pressed firm against her shoulder. "I have company," she said, her voice like ice. "And you're trespassing." Harlow's smile vanished. "Now that ain't very hospitable, Miss Northcott." "I think the lady made herself clear," Xavier said, his voice dangerously low. "Move on." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Harlow's hand hovered over his gun. His men spread out, flanking him. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Then Harlow looked at Xavier, and a strange look of understanding passed between them. Harlow relaxed. He tipped his hat in a mocking gesture. "Another time, then," he said. He looked past Xavier, directly at Eliza. His eyes were full of a cold amusement. "We'll be seeing you around, Miss Northcott. Lambert here will make sure of it." They wheeled their horses around and rode off. As they disappeared over the rise, Eliza let out a shaky breath. But the fear that gripped her had nothing to do with Jake Harlow. It had everything to do with his parting words. "Lambert here will make sure of it." It wasn't a threat from a drifter. It was a confirmation of her deepest fears. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a performance, and she was the intended audience. "Thank you," Eliza said, her voice quiet. She watched Xavier searching his face for any sign of deception. There was none. His expression was grave, his concern seemingly genuine. "Those men are trouble," he said, his jaw tight. "I've suspected for a while they might be connected to the rustling." "The sheriff is looking into Harlow," she said, testing him, "but he says there's no proof." "Proof is hard to come by," Xavier said, his eyes meeting hers. "But I have a feeling they'll be back. They see you as a soft target." His words were meant to frighten her, to make her feel vulnerable, to make her rely on him. She could feel the trap closing around her. He wanted her scared. He wanted her isolated. He wanted her land. "I should stay," he said, his voice low. "At least for a while. They might come back today." "You can't stand guard at my property indefinitely," she pointed out, her mind racing. "No," he admitted, "but I have an idea, a way to solve both our problems." His proposal was simple. It was logical. It was brilliant. He believed Harlow and his gang would try to hit her small herd next. They were an easier mark than his own well-guarded ranch. He proposed they set a trap. He would station a few of his most trusted men in the hills around her property, hidden from sight. They would wait for Harlow to make his move, and then they would catch them in the act. Red-handed, with undeniable proof for the sheriff. It was a perfect plan. It positioned him as her protector, her partner. It gave him a legitimate reason to have his men all over her land. It was a checkmate, and she had no choice but to agree. To refuse would be illogical, suspicious. It would show her hand. "All right," she said, meeting his gaze. "We'll do it your way." Over the next week, her life changed. Xavier was a constant presence. He visited every day, always under the guise of coordinating their plan. They talked about sight lines and ambush points and escape routes. He was meticulous, he was professional, and he was utterly charming. He told her stories of his time back east. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke of her father and her dreams for the ranch. He made her laugh, something she hadn't done in months. And every single morning, without fail, a fresh bouquet of wildflowers appeared on her windowsill. It was a cruel, brilliant strategy. He was systematically breaking down her defenses, not with force, but with kindness. He was making her doubt her own instincts. She found herself watching him, looking for the mask to slip, but it never did. Was she wrong? Had she imagined that look in his eyes? Was he truly just a good man, a concerned neighbor? One evening they sat on her porch watching the sun set. The sky was on fire, a riot of orange and purple. "Why do you still act surprised by the flowers?" he asked, his voice soft. "You know they're from me." Eliza forced a smile. "Because each time feels like the first. No one's ever done something so thoughtful for me before." It was a lie. Each time she saw them, a cold dread filled her. They were a reminder, a brand, a claim. His hand covered hers. His touch was warm, calloused, and strong. It sent a jolt through her. "Your father would be proud of you, Eliza. I know I am." She turned to face him. They were so close. The fading light caught the blue of his eyes, and for a terrifying moment, she saw the man she wanted him to be. The good man. The hero. Slowly, he leaned in. He gave her every chance to pull away. His lips met hers, gently at first. A question. Her mind screamed at her to run, to push him away, to brandish her rifle and tell him to get off her land. But she didn't. She had to know. She had to see this through to the end. She answered his kiss, sliding her hand to the back of his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and a part of her, a lonely, grieving part she had buried long ago, responded. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that," he breathed, "since the first moment I saw you." The words were perfect, and that's what terrified her. They were too perfect. That night, sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. His kiss had unsettled her, confused her. He was either the best man she had ever met, or the most dangerous. There was no in-between. She got up, lighting a single candle, and went to her father's old roll-top desk. It was full of ledgers, receipts, the mundane paperwork of a failing ranch. She didn't know what she was looking for. A clue, a sign, anything. Her fingers brushed against a loose piece of wood at the back of a small drawer. Curious, she pried it open. It was a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Her father's handwriting filled the pages. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few entries were about the ranch, the weather, the price of cattle. But then, it changed. He wrote about pressure, about neighbors wanting his land. He wrote about the Diamond Creek Ranch, about Xavier Lambert's father. "The old man is a snake," he had written. "He smiles to your face while his men cut your fences at night." Then she saw it. A passage that made the blood drain from her face. Lambert's men were here again. They left their mark. The devil's paintbrush, they call it. A bunch of wildflowers left on the windowsill. A pretty threat. It means they've marked the land for their own. It means you sell or you get buried. The devil's paintbrush. A vibrant, beautiful wildflower. Purple and yellow and a blue so deep it was almost black. The same flowers Xavier left for her every single morning. The same flowers sitting in a jar on her table. The kiss, the kindness, the concern. It was all a lie. A sophisticated, cruel, and patient trap. And she had walked right into it. The world had shifted on its axis. The man who had kissed her last night was not a suitor. He was a predator, continuing his father's work. The kindness was a weapon. The flowers were a death threat. Eliza sat in the candlelight, her father's journal clutched in her hands, and she felt a rage so pure and cold it burned away her fear. They had killed her father, not with a bullet, but with pressure, with threats, with the slow, grinding despair that came from fighting a war you couldn't win. They thought she was just a girl. They thought they could break her, too. She closed the journal and placed it back in its secret compartment. She looked at the flowers on her table, their vibrant colors now looking sinister, mocking. She didn't throw them out. She left them there in the center of the table, a declaration of her own. I know. The next morning when Xavier arrived, she was ready. She greeted him with a warm smile, a cup of coffee, and a heart full of ice. She had to play the part. Her life depended on it. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. "Better than I have in a long time," she lied, returning his gaze without flinching. "I feel safe, knowing you're watching out for me." She saw a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He believed he was winning. He believed she was falling for him. Good. That's exactly what she wanted. They spent the morning going over the plan for the ambush one more time. She asked questions, pointed out potential flaws, played the part of the intelligent but inexperienced woman relying on his expertise. All the while she was studying him, gathering information. How many men did he have? Where would they be positioned? What were their names? He answered everything, his arrogance making him careless. He was so sure of himself, so certain of her submission, that he didn't see her mind working behind the soft smiles and trusting eyes. He was laying a trap for Jake Harlow. She was mapping out the trap he was laying for her. That afternoon, Sheriff Miller paid her another visit. He didn't come alone this time. 2 deputies sat on their horses behind him, their faces grim. "Miss Northcott," the sheriff said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I've come with an offer." "An offer? There's a buyer. For your land. A very motivated buyer, willing to pay a fair price. They wish to remain anonymous, of course." He named a price. It wasn't fair. It was an insult. Enough for her to get on a train and disappear, but not enough to start a new life. It was get-out-of-town money. "I'm not selling," Eliza said, her voice flat. The sheriff's folksy charm evaporated. His eyes turned hard as river stones. "I think you should reconsider, Missy. This is a generous offer, the only one you're likely to get." He leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to happen out here. Accidents happen all the time. Fences break, cattle wander off. Sometimes folks get sick, real sick, like your daddy did. The threat was naked, brutal. He was telling her. He was telling her they had murdered her father and they would do the same to her. The connection was clear. The sheriff wasn't just ignoring the Lamberts' crimes. He was an active participant. He was on their payroll. He was their official enforcer. "Thank you for the offer, Sheriff," Eliza said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I'll think about it." "You do that," he said, pulling his horse around. "You think long and hard about what's best for your health." She watched them ride away, a cloud of dust in their wake. The board was clear now. The pieces were all in place. Xavier, the charming face of the operation, the sheriff, the fist, Jake Harlow, the pawn, and Old Man Lambert, the king, hiding in his castle at Diamond Creek, moving them all. They thought they had her cornered. They thought she was a lone woman, terrified with no one to turn to. But her father had left her more than just a failing ranch. He had left her his journal. And as she reread the final pages, she found one more secret. A name. A man in a town 2 days' ride away. A retired U.S. Marshal her father had trusted. "If you're ever in real trouble," he'd written, "find Jedediah Kane. He's the last honest man in this territory. Tell him Lambert sent you." It was a desperate gamble. Leaving the ranch now, even for a day, was risky. Xavier's men were supposedly watching for rustlers, but she knew they were watching her. She had to create a diversion. She had to give herself a window, and she knew just how to do it. That evening, when Xavier came for his daily visit, Eliza was different. She was vulnerable, frightened. The mask of the strong, independent woman was gone, replaced by the terrified girl they expected her to be. She told him about the sheriff's visit, her voice choked with manufactured tears. She told him about the offer, the veiled threats. She let him see her fear. "He's right," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I can't do this. I can't fight them." Xavier pulled her into his arms. He held her, stroking her hair, murmuring comforting words. His embrace was strong, protective, and it felt like being held by a snake. "Shh, it's all right," he said. "I won't let them hurt you. We'll get Harlow. We'll show them this community protects its own. You just have to trust me." "I do trust you," she whispered, looking up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. "It's just, I need a day. Just one day to myself, to think, to clear my head before the ambush." She watched his face carefully. A flicker of suspicion crossed his features. "Alone? I don't think that's a good idea, Eliza." "Please," she begged. "I'll just ride into the foothills. Be by myself for a few hours. I won't go far. I can't think straight here, with everything." She could see the wheels turning in his head. A day to think was a day to consider the offer, to let the fear sink in, to realize her only option was to sell or to throw herself into his arms for protection. Her apparent breakdown was playing right into his hands. It would make his victory even sweeter. "All right," he said finally, his voice soft. "One day, but my men will keep an eye on you from a distance, just to be safe." "Thank you, Xavier," she breathed, her voice full of a gratitude that tasted like ash in her mouth. The next morning, she rode out. Not towards the foothills, but south, keeping to the low ground, using every gully and creek bed to hide her movements. She knew his men were watching. She had to assume they were good at their jobs. She rode for an hour in the direction she said she was going. Then she found a dense thicket of cottonwoods and dismounted. She took a spare blanket from her saddlebag and draped it over a large bush, arranging her hat on top. From a distance, it looked like someone resting in the shade. It wouldn't fool them for long, but she didn't need long. She needed a head start. Leaving her horse tied in the thicket, she scrambled down into a dry wash and began to run. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached. She was on foot, moving through terrain a horse couldn't easily follow. She was making for the old trading post road, a seldom used track that led towards the town of Redemption, where Jedediah Kane lived. It was a 2-day ride, which meant it was a brutal, desperate journey on foot, but she had no choice. The truth was in Redemption. Her survival depended on it. As dusk fell, she was exhausted, thirsty, and her feet were raw. But she had made it to the road. A grizzled old prospector with a mule cart gave her a ride, no questions asked. He shared his jerky and his water, and the quiet companionship was a balm to her frayed nerves. She arrived in Redemption covered in dust, looking more like a beggar than a landowner. Jedediah Kane was not what she expected. He wasn't a towering, square-jawed lawman. He was a small, wiry man with faded blue eyes and a face like a road map of the West. He was sitting on the porch of the town's only hotel, cleaning a shotgun. "Mr. Kane?" Eliza asked, her voice hoarse. He looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "Depends who's asking." "My father was Henry Northcott. He told me to find you if I was ever in trouble." The name registered. Kane put down his shotgun and stood up. He gestured to a chair. "Tell me your trouble, girl." She told him everything. About her father's death, the Wildflowers, Xavier's seduction, the sheriff's threats, the journal. She laid it all out, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. Kane listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When she was finished, he was silent for a long time. "Your father was a good man," he said finally. "Stubborn as a mule, but good. I warned him about that land." "The land? Why? What's so special about it?" "It ain't the grazing," Kane said, leaning forward. "Your property sits on the largest silver lode in this territory. It's not on any official survey map. Your grandfather, a geologist, found it years ago. He kept it quiet, hoping to work it himself one day. Your father knew. That's why he never sold, no matter how hard things got." Silver. The puzzle piece she was missing. It wasn't about cattle or water rights. It was about a fortune buried beneath her feet. "And the Lamberts know," she breathed. "Old man Lambert has been trying to get that land for 30 years, Kane confirmed. "He drove your grandfather to an early grave with his schemes. Looks like he did the same to your father. That boy of his, Xavier, he's just the newest tool in the old man's box." Then Kane told her something that made her blood run cold. "But here's the thing you need to understand about Xavier Lambert. He's not his father. He's got a conscience, buried deep. He does what the old man says, but he hates it. I've heard stories. Times he's secretly helped the very people he was supposed to be running off. He's walking a tightrope. He's trapped, same as you." A new, terrifying possibility bloomed in her mind. What if Xavier wasn't just a tool? What if the conflict she sometimes thought she saw in his eyes was real? What if he could be turned? It was an insane risk, but it might be her only way out. "What do I do?" she asked. Kane picked up his shotgun, the afternoon light glinting on the polished steel. "You go back," he said. "You spring your trap. But it ain't Harlow you're catching. You're catching a Lambert." The ride back was fueled by a desperate, cold resolve. Jedediah Kane had given her a new lens through which to see her world. He'd also given her a small, flat package wrapped in oilcloth. "Proof," he'd said. "Your father sent it to me for safekeeping weeks before he died. An official assay report from a man in Denver, confirming the silver, and a sworn affidavit from a former Diamond Creek ranch hand. Testifies that he heard old man Lambert give the order to harass your father until he broke, or died." Armed with the truth, Eliza rode back not to her ranch, but to a place she knew Xavier would be. The boundary fence. The place where he had first helped her, where their strange, deceptive courtship had begun. She waited for him. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, he appeared, just as she knew he would. He wasn't on his usual patrol route. He was looking for her. When he saw her, the relief on his face was so profound, so genuine, that it staggered her. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe it was real. "Eliza, my God, where have you been?" he said, swinging down from his horse before it had even stopped. "My men lost you. I've been riding for hours. I thought—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair, his composure completely gone. He looked frantic. He looked like a man who had been terrified he'd lost something precious. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. "I just needed to think." "You were gone all night," he said, his voice raw. "I was half out of my mind." She looked him in the eye. The time for games was over. "I know about the flowers, Xavier." His face went blank. The mask slammed back into place. "I told you, they reminded me of the devil's paintbrush," she finished for him. "The mark your father uses to claim land before he takes it. The same mark he used on my father." She saw it then. The flicker of shock, of horror in his eyes. He hadn't known she knew. He hadn't known that she knew the symbol. "Eliza," he started, taking a step towards her. "I also know about the silver." That stopped him cold. He looked as if she had physically struck him. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin pale beneath his tan. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and she was the one swinging the sledgehammer. "My father was murdered," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Your father killed him, and you were sent to finish the job, to scare me, to charm me, to do whatever it took to get me off my land so he could have what's underneath it." She had expected denials. She had expected anger, threats. She got none of it. Xavier Lambert just stood there, the setting sun at his back, and looked utterly, completely broken. "Yes," he whispered, the word a bare exhalation of breath. "That was the plan." The confession hung in the air between them, and then came the twist she never saw coming. "But it all went wrong," he said, his voice filled with a desperate self-loathing. "The plan went wrong the moment I first saw you standing at your father's grave, so strong, so alone. I was supposed to see you as a target, an obstacle, but all I saw was you." He looked up, and the anguish in his eyes was undeniable. "My father is a monster, Eliza. He's consumed by greed. He sent me to break you, and I played the part. But I was trying to fight him, in my own way. The rustling at my ranch, that was real. It was arranged by my own father. A punishment because he suspected I was going soft. A way to give me a pretext to get close to you, to force my hand." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture that was more complex and terrifying than she had ever imagined. He was a prisoner, too. "And the flowers?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The flowers were a warning," he said, his voice cracking. "It was his symbol, yes. But I kept leaving them because I hoped you would find out what they meant. I hoped you would understand the danger you were in. It was the only way I could tell you the truth without him finding out. It was a desperate, stupid plan. I was trying to warn you and court you at the same time." He took a shaky step closer. "I am falling in love with you, Eliza, and I have been leading you into a trap that will get you killed." In that moment, staring into the face of her sworn enemy, Eliza Northcott made a choice. She could destroy him, or she could trust him. Jedediah Kane's words came back to her. He's got a conscience. "Then we changed the plan," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "The trap is still on, but it's not for Jake Harlow anymore. It's for your father." A new alliance was forged in the dying light, a desperate pact between two people trapped by the same tyrant. The air crackled with a dangerous energy. They were no longer predator and prey. They were partners. The plan they hatched was simple, audacious, and likely to get them both killed. The fake rustling would go ahead as scheduled. But instead of Xavier and his trusted men swooping in to save Eliza, they would be creating a scene of chaos, a scene designed to draw out the true powers behind the scheme. "My father is arrogant," Xavier explained, his voice low and urgent as they stood in the deepening twilight. "He won't be able to resist seeing the final act himself. He'll want to watch as Harlow runs you off and you come running to me for salvation. He'll likely be watching from the ridge to the north." "And the sheriff?" Eliza asked. "He'll come too once the shooting starts. To investigate. To find Harlow's body and pronounce it justice. And to take your statement. The statement of a terrified woman grateful to the Lamberts." "So we're trapped between Harlow's gang, your father's men, and a crooked sheriff," Eliza summarized, a grim reality settling in. "It sounds like a suicide mission." "It is," Xavier admitted, "unless we have an ace up our sleeve." He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "You mentioned a man. Jedediah Kane." Eliza nodded. "He's the one who gave me the proof, the assay report." "Kane is a legend," Xavier breathed, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "If he's on our side, we might have a chance. We need to get a message to him. We need him to bring the law, the real law, federal marshals." The problem was time. The ambush was set for the next night. There was no way to get a message to Redemption and have Kane return with help in 24 hours. It was impossible. "No," Eliza said, her mind racing. "It's not. The telegraph line runs through Silver Creek. If we can get a wire to the marshal's office in Helena and Kane is there—" It was a long shot. They would have to trust a telegraph operator not to be in the sheriff's pocket. They had to get into town, send the wire, and get back without anyone knowing. "I'll go," Xavier said immediately. "No," Eliza countered. "You'll be missed. They're watching you as much as they're watching me. I'm the one who is supposed to be having a breakdown. I'll ride to town to see the doctor, a woman on the verge of collapse. No one will question it." That night, Eliza rode into Silver Creek. The town was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She went to the doctor's office first, putting on a convincing performance of a distraught woman, getting a bottle of laudanum for her nerves. Then she went to the telegraph office. The operator was a young man with a nervous twitch. She wrote out the message, her hand shielding the paper. "Jedediah Kane. Stop. Lambert makes final move. Stop. Northcott Ranch. Tomorrow night. Stop. Bring marshals. Stop. E.N." She handed it to the operator, along with a gold coin that was worth more than he made in a month. "This message goes to the U.S. Marshal's office in Helena, and no one else. Understood?" The young man's eyes widened at the coin. He swallowed hard and nodded. Eliza had to trust that his greed was stronger than his fear of Sheriff Miller. The next day was the longest of Eliza's life. She and Xavier met one last time at dawn, finalizing their plan. They couldn't be sure if Kane had gotten the message or if he could get there in time. They had to proceed as if they were on their own. The trap was simple. When Harlow's men came for the cattle, Eliza would be waiting, not in the house, but in the barn. Xavier would position himself in the woods on the far side of the pasture. They would catch them in a crossfire. The goal wasn't to win a gunfight. The goal was to make enough noise, to create enough chaos, to draw the other players onto the field. As night fell, a heavy darkness settled over the ranch. The air was still, pregnant with violence. Eliza sat in the hayloft of her barn, her father's rifle in her hands. The rifle felt different tonight. Not just a tool, but a legacy, an extension of her own will to survive. Through a crack in the boards, she watched the pasture. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. Then she saw them, shadows detaching themselves from the deeper shadows of the tree line. Harlow and his men moving quietly towards her herd. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. She waited, letting them get into the middle of the pasture. She took a deep breath, aimed high, and fired. The shot shattered the silence. A second shot answered from the woods, Xavier's signal. All hell broke loose. Harlow's men, caught by surprise, started firing wildly. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness in strobing, terrifying bursts. Eliza fired again, then again, not aiming to hit, but to confuse, to panic them. She heard shouts, curses. The cattle were spooked, stampeding through the pasture, adding to the chaos. Then, from the north ridge, she saw it. A single lantern, waved back and forth. Old Man Lambert was there. He was watching his plan unfold. And then she heard the sound of more horses coming fast. Sheriff Miller and his deputies riding to the sound of the guns. All the pieces were on the board. And she and Xavier were right in the middle, outgunned and surrounded. A bullet splintered the wood next to her face, showering her with splinters. Harlow's men had figured out where she was. "Come on, Kane," she whispered into the darkness, chambering another round. "Come on." The gunfight was a whirlwind of noise and confusion. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the barn. Eliza kept low, moving between the hay bales, firing just enough to keep their heads down. She could hear Xavier's rifle cracking from the woods, a steady, measured rhythm in the chaos. He was a better shot than she was. He was drawing most of their fire. Jake Harlow, realizing he'd been set up, was screaming at his men. "It's a trap! Forget the cattle! Get the girl!" They started advancing on the barn. She was pinned down. It was then that Sheriff Miller and his deputies arrived, but they didn't ride into the pasture to stop the fighting. They took up positions at the edge of the property, blocking the only road out. They weren't there to restore order. They were there to make sure there were no survivors. The trap had closed. From the ridge, she could see the silhouette of a man watching it all, impassive and patient. Old Man Lambert. The king was watching his pawns clear the board. Just as the first of Harlow's men reached the barn door, a new sound cut through the gunfire. A bugle call. Clear and sharp, it sliced through the night. For a moment everyone froze. Then, from the south, a line of riders appeared, cresting the hill at a full gallop. They were dark shapes against the faint moonlight, but their purpose was unmistakable. Leading them was a small, wiry figure on a large bay horse, Jedediah Kane. And behind him were 6 United States Marshals, their badges glinting in the faint light. "This is United States Marshal Kane," his voice boomed across the valley, a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Drop your weapons! You are all under arrest!" Panic erupted. Harlow's men, caught between Eliza and the marshals, threw down their guns instantly. Sheriff Miller and his deputies, however, made a fatal mistake. They drew their weapons and turned to fire on the approaching lawmen. It was a short, brutal exchange. The marshals were disciplined, their fire accurate. In seconds, the sheriff and his 2 men were cut down. The sudden, overwhelming arrival of true justice seemed to break something in Xavier's father. Eliza saw him on the ridge, turning to flee. But Xavier was already moving. He burst from the tree line, running not towards safety, but directly towards his father. "Father!" he yelled. The old man turned, his face a mask of pure fury in the moonlight. He raised a pistol. "You worthless, sentimental fool! You've ruined everything!" He fired. Eliza screamed. Xavier crumpled to the ground. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over Eliza. She scrambled down from the hayloft, ignoring the danger, ignoring the marshals shouting commands. She ran towards the ridge, her father's rifle feeling light as a feather in her hands. She saw Old Man Lambert standing over his son, preparing to fire again. "Lambert!" she shrieked. He turned towards the sound of her voice, his eyes wide with surprise. That moment of hesitation was all she needed. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. She just kept running, closing the distance, her fury giving her speed she didn't know she possessed. He fumbled to aim at her, but it was too late. She slammed into him, the butt of her rifle catching him hard in the stomach. The old man wheezed, the gun flying from his hand as he staggered backward, right at the edge of the steep, rocky ridge. He teetered there for a moment, his arms windmilling, and then he was gone, tumbling into the darkness with a single, cut-off scream. Silence descended upon the valley, broken only by the whimpering of one of Harlow's wounded men and the sound of Eliza's own ragged breathing. She ran to Xavier's side. He was clutching his shoulder, blood staining his shirt, but his eyes were open. They were fixed on her. "You came back," he whispered, his voice weak. "I always will," she said, tears finally streaming down her face as she tore a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. Jedediah Kane and the marshals surrounded them, their faces grim. Kane knelt beside Xavier, checking the wound. "Through the shoulder, he'll live." He looked from the wounded Xavier to the determined girl holding him. Then he looked toward the ridge where the most powerful man in the territory had just met his end. "You two," he said, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Make one hell of a team." The aftermath was a blur. The outlaws were rounded up. The bodies were collected. Statements were taken. Jake Harlow, faced with a hanging rope, sang like a canary, detailing every crime the Lamberts and Sheriff Miller had committed over the last 20 years. The affidavit Eliza had brought from Kane was the nail in the coffin. The Lambert empire, built on greed and blood, crumbled overnight. Xavier survived. The bullet had missed anything vital. As he recovered, Eliza never left his side. The deception that had defined their beginning was burned away in the crucible of the gunfight, leaving only a raw, undeniable truth. They had saved each other. In the spring, with the land coming back to life, they stood on the porch of her small cabin. The deed to her property was safe, the silver beneath it legally hers. The Diamond Creek Ranch was in the hands of the federal government, to be broken up and sold off. "What happens now?" Xavier asked, his arm, still in a sling, resting around her shoulders. "Now," Eliza said, leaning her head against him, "we build something, together." He didn't offer her a ring, he offered her a partnership. A new ranch, built not on their father's legacies of secrets and blood, but on their own foundation of trust and resilience. Their wedding was a small affair, with Jedediah Kane serving as the best man. And as the years passed, the Northcott Lambert Ranch became a beacon of honesty and success in the territory. They had children, a boy and a girl, who grew up knowing the value of hard work and the truth of their family's story. And every morning, without fail, Xavier Lambert would rise before dawn. He would walk to the creek that divided their old properties and gather a small bouquet of wildflowers. Not the devil's paintbrush, but the bright, honest colors of the Montana prairie. He would place them on her windowsill, a daily reminder, not of a threat or a claim, but of a warning that had become a promise. A promise that even in the harshest of lands, in the darkest of times, something beautiful and strong could grow. What do you think would have happened if Jedediah Kane hadn't gotten the message in time? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.